Institute of Advanced Studies, so we are mainly focused on academic research. However, from time to time we are very glad to host such events, and I am happy to say that we already have 3 such events organized in cooperation with the German Embassy in Bucharest. One was in last summer about NATO, the other one was in this fall about energy policies, and here we are, having always very prestigious and very important guests coming from the foreign ministers from Germany and from Romania. I have to thank for this series of conferences to the ambassador of Germany in Romania, His Excellency Hans-Hermann Lauck, and I invite him to say a few words of welcome. Welcome also from the part of New Europe College and the president of the foundation of New Europe College, Professor Andrei Pleș. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Mrs. Sandu-Dediu, Honorable Foreign Minister, distinguished Ambassador Leenderdze, Excellencies, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. 5 months ago, as it was already mentioned, we launched a series of bilateral discussions on the objectives, interests and instruments of Germany's foreign policy and their relation to Romanian positions. We kicked off in July with an event on security and NATO. In September we continued our series with a discussion on energy policy and the German Energiewende. And our third event today is a very special one for 2 reasons. Firstly, as the OSCE stands for a comprehensive security concept which not only covers so-called traditional aspects of security, but also deals with the economic and human dimensions of security, today's event is closely related to the 2 topics we have already discussed this year. Secondly, because today's event is devoted to a topic that will mark Germany's foreign policy in a very visible manner in the course of next year. On 1st January 2016, Germany will officially take over the OSCE chairmanship. And in doing so, we want to contribute to renewing dialogue, rebuilding trust and restoring security within the OSCE area. I'm particularly grateful that Ambassador Antje Leenderdze, head of the task force for the German OSCE chairmanship in 2016, at the Federal Foreign Office, was able to make it to Bucharest, and that she will give us an overview of what is on the agenda for the 2016 German chairmanship of OSCE. And I'm also very delighted and grateful that Foreign Minister Lazar Comănescu is joining our debate this afternoon. Even so, his agenda is especially today very tight. At this series of discussions is especially conceived as a forum for an open and broad debate among Romanian, German and international guests and participants from ministries to embassies, as well as from think tanks, the media and academic institutions. I'm looking forward to another lively debate with you this afternoon. And in this regard, I'm particularly also grateful that Mr. Jon Jonitze was prepared to chair our discussion today. As editor-in-chief of the 2 magazines, Foreign Policy and Historia, he has the perfect professional background to chair our event today. Before closing, I would of course also like to take the opportunity to once again thank our cooperation partners from the New Europe College for hosting our series of bilateral discussions. My thanks go especially to you, Mrs. Sandu-Dediu, and your staff for hosting us again and being our cooperation partners. And now, without further ado, Mr. Jonitze, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You are a very good moderator. You can take my place here. Thank you all for being here to participate at the, let's see, it's working. Yes, to participate at this very important discussion with a very important topic, the new chairmanship 2016 German chairmanship of Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. We are in a very turbulent times. We have a complex of crises in Europe, Middle East, and Eastern European part in Ukraine, and also we have a lot of frozen conflicts in this part of the world. We want to see the German point of view, the German agenda, also the Romanian expectation about this important year to come. So please, Ambassador, Antje Denderste, it's correct? Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very glad that we have an opportunity not only to introduce some of the priorities we already know, because there's always a kind of unknown if you enter into a chairmanship. So some of the priorities we know already and we have preparing for, as well as the Romanian partnership we are having in conducting, or we hope to have next year in conducting our chairmanship. And I'm very grateful to be here in Bucharest. It's a timely opportunity to talk between Romanian and German partners about the OSCE and the European security order crisis we are facing now, because we are just a few days after the Belgrade Ministerial, so that was closing the Serbian chairmanship of the OSCE this year, and just 3 weeks approximately before the German chairmanship begins. So this is really an ideal moment. We think, or one of the reasons we went for the chairmanship was that we saw the critical political situation in Europe. Ian just described, and there is we wanted to take on responsibility to make a contribution, to manage it, to hedge it in, maybe to kind of find ways in the long term to come out of it, and I will come to that later. The Belgrade Ministerial leaves us a mixed legacy, a mixed balance. On the one hand, we had rather constructive, or under the circumstances, constructive exchange between the ministers in the informal and formal exchanges at political level. On the other hand, we have a real slim picking on concrete decisions left. There were only 4, to my counting, for decisions that the 57 members, participating states of the OSCE could find consensus on this year. This is a negative record, I would say. This has not only led to, for example, no decision in the human dimension, which is completely deceiving in our respect, and also not led to a declaration on Ukraine. But we can discuss this maybe in the question and answers part of our event here. Some general remarks before I try to outline 5 action lines we have in a pretty much bottom-up and pragmatic approach to our chairmanship planning, singled out and identified as most important for next year. The general situation is, in our view, as follows. We have a situation where it is particularly important to hold firm to the vision of Helsinki and to the commitments and principles of the OSCE. This is something which seems to be a banality, but in a world where crisis follows crisis and where challenges to the European political and security order are following each other, and I do not only refer to the crisis in and around Ukraine, but also to recent tensions, for example, among two participating states of the OSCE, means Russian Federation and Turkey, there is an increasing feeling that we have to reunite forces and redouble efforts to maintain, preserve and strengthen the mechanisms and multilateral organizations we have that at our disposal to try to not to break up the dialogue and to keep the communication channels between participating states open. Our leitmotif, therefore, for the chairmanship, and Ambassador Lau mentioned it, is renewing dialogue, rebuilding trust and restoring security. This may sound a bit ambitious, but it's not if you look, concretely at the following, because it's a step-by-step approach. We have the assessment that it is necessary first to renew the dialogue after this crisis. Insisting on the principles and commitments, but also to find new ways of a maybe more honest dialogue that is maintained and is not only touching the core issues, but also the broad range of necessity to cooperate in the OSCE area for all other participating states. And only if we do that, we can rebuild trust, because there has been a tremendous loss of trust. This is amongst the participating states, and this is one of the problems we have to tackle. And restoring security would be hopefully the result of that dialogue and trust-building exercise, which is a longer-term exercise. And I can see here the colleague from Austria. Austria will take over in 2017 the chairmanship, and we're sure that most of the priorities we are now setting are only kind of the beginning of the process, and maybe they have to be taken up by future chairmanships. So the crisis in and around Ukraine has proven that the OSCE has an indispensable value as a forum for dialogue, and we want to make use of it. We should all participating states strive to preserve, implement and strengthen our common commitments. So order and multilateral dialogue as opposed to crisis and disorder. We should look further over the years to come, and we should leave an OSCE who is a little bit updated and upgraded. So try to enhance the capabilities and capacities to meet crisis. So this is one of our goals too. And we know in that respect that Romania will be a reliable partner and will help us. And the third general remark is maybe the crisis is too fresh still, and the kind of the shaping of maybe what could be a new East-West relation is too fresh to head for a grand design solution like kind of meeting and reconfirming simply principles and commitments, and then hope that they are not inflicted like last time. So the conditions are simply not there. So we follow a pragmatic bottom-up approach, and we are looking for opportunities for dialogue, even though there is disagreement on these essential questions. We will strive for exchanges between the OSCE and other institutions, maybe more than other chairmanships, because 3 chairmanships before us were neither member of NATO nor member of EU. We're the first to begin, and after us will Austria as an EU member continue. The first EU member since 4 years. And we will try to follow, as I said, a bottom-up approach with 5 action lines. The first line of action is clear. There is crisis and conflict management needed. This refers to the situation in and around Ukraine. We have instruments like the Special Representative of the OSCE Chairmanship in office, Ambassador Martin Seidig, an Austrian. That was especially, this is not by coincidence, because we would have to follow up this task, who represents the OSCE in the Trilateral Contact Group, and there is SMM, so the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, and the OSCE Project Coordinator and the 3 autonomous institutions likewise play important roles and should above all, help Ukraine stem its tremendous reform efforts at the same time while meeting the crisis situation. We think that supporting the SNM will be in the immediate future remain high on our agenda. The mission has faced and continues to face serious challenges to its capacities, and it needs the support of the participating states, including through providing it with qualified personnel, and we will have to extend the mandate of SNM in March 2016. Important part of current crisis management is, of course, not only the crisis in and around Ukraine, but also the protected conflicts Ian mentioned. We will pursue these efforts in the established formats. There is the Georgia-Geneva international discussions under EU lead, but with an OSCE chair, co-chairing, and then there is, of course, 5+2, Moldova-Transnistria OSCE format, OSCE-led, and co-chairs of the Minsk group lead in an OSCE context, the Nagorno-Karabakh talks and format. Though we think it is probably not very likely that there will be a settlement of these conflicts during our chairmanship, we think it's important to focus on concrete confidence-building measures and to try to alleviate human suffering, to hatch them in, to prevent escalation, and to pave the way for a peaceful settlement in the future. The second line of action is strengthening the OSCE capacities. I already mentioned it. There has to be a moderate strengthening of the capacities. It's not duplicating NATO or EU or UN, but there are some deficits really in the organization, in the Secretariat Conflict Prevention Center that have to be addressed in a moderate way. And we want to stimulate the discussion of structures and capabilities within the OSCE participating states. The tools have to be fit for the future, and we had this situation once in Ukraine, where it was not easy to establish a monitoring mission in such a small amount of time. There should be better preparation for crisis management of the OSCE. For this we need, of course, a budget, which is the first big challenge of our chairmanship, because it has to be consented until the end of this year. But I can tell you most of the chairmanships have not, or maybe it's 50-50. 50% of the chairmanships have been having a budget at the end of the year. The others, for example, the Swiss, have been waiting until May before there was a chairmanship or the budget of the OSCE was consented. It's always a very difficult question. The third line of action will be strengthening the OSCE as a dialogue platform. In the crisis in and around Ukraine, the OSCE has been a proven forum to maintain broad communication channels, and particularly in these stormy crisis times. We want to trigger a discussion in the longer-term perspective about the overarching problems of the European security order, maybe kind of also following up on the OSCE elaborated process of the Helsinki +40, and also on the panel of eminent persons. But there is a logical way to head for bridge-building issues, so for topics that are of interest for all participating states, like transnational challenges and threats, migration, terrorism, violent extremism, trafficking of human beings and drugs, as well as hazards in the cyber area. These are classical OSCE issues, and there is an ongoing tradition of tackling them within the organization. We have to keep, at the same time, dialogue going on the confidence and security building measures, so CSBMs, and on the reform and modernization of key arms control instruments, as for example, the Vienna document. There is, for a long time, a stagnation in this area. The environment is probably not the most conducive one in the crisis situation for next year, but if you lose track and if you don't continue to pursue the discussion, there will be no preparation for better times, hopefully, to come, and maybe a longer perspective. The fourth line of action is fostering sustainable connectivity and good governance in the OSCE area. The second dimension, the dimension of the economy and environment, has been not so played with or worked with in former times. This is because the OSCE is more of a platform than a decision-making body. I mean, it's not like the European Union or classical economic instruments. There are no binding decisions to be made, so it is a forum for dialogue, a platform for dialogue, and we will try to strengthen this economic and environmental dimension and to foster cooperation in this regard. Good governance and its relevance to stable and sustainable economic development in the OSCE area will be our focus, and we have one new idea to renew the dialogue and to give the private sector more voice in the OSCE in order to make the second dimension more operational. And we will have a business conference in May 2016 where we intend to invite business organizations and business private sector people from all over the OSCE area. Then there is a fifth, and I conclude with this, line of action, of course, the human dimension. Human dimension is for a longer time under real pressure in the OSCE area. We think there is no time, this is not the time to have new commitments, but rather to defend the old ones and try to make them implemented and strengthened. We have the situation that we cannot really avoid to clearly name deficits in that human dimension based on the existing OSCE acquis. But there is, I think, thematic priorities can be found which are less disputed and which are truly within the core of the human dimension of the OSCE. The priorities are freedom of speech and freedom of the media, and national minorities as bridge builders, as well as tolerance and non-discrimination. This is a field that has been growing in its importance since we have the influx of migrants at least in Germany, so I speak for my own country, and the challenge this will produce in our societies is something which has, there is a needed contribution of best practices and dialogue on tolerance and non-discrimination, which we will need to cope with the new situation. Please allow me concluding remarks, maybe in that sense. These 5 action lines cannot be fulfilled or cannot be successful if we limit them to government officials. To counter the risk of further alienation between the OSCE participants, the participating states, we will, wherever possible, intensify the exchange with the civil society, including youth programs, for example, which was very important for the Serbian and Swiss chairmanship, think tanks and NGOs, so think tanks like yours here. I'm really invited also to continue the discussion, and I look forward to our debate here, but also to a continued dialogue with Romanian partners during our chairmanship year. As I said, you can plan for priorities and have a concept, but what happens in the chairmanship is another question. We already know there will be a NATO summit, there will be a referendum in Great Britain or in the UK on the EU. There will be many things happening, and so we try to stay flexible, and we need, especially in these crises, maybe new crisis situations, support from our partners, and we know that we can count on Romania in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your speech. We have now the picture of German priorities for the next year chairmanship. The next question is about the Romanian expectation and what can Romania do to help Germany in this very challenging chairmanship of the next year. Please, Mr. Ambassador and Minister Lazar.
Thank you very much, dear friend. Well, I'll start by saying that my team has prepared some notes for you, but I would allow myself to get over what they have been preparing, which is is of quite quality, since we are in a gathering where, let's say, we want to understand more and better from each other. I will be tempted to, I'm not tempted to, let's say, to speak out of this, let's say, guidelines which were prepared by people. But first of all, before that, I will make a few remarks on the topic. Let me say that, and I hope you'll agree with me, that this event, which is being organized by the German embassy here in Bucharest and the college here, CaleaEuropeana College, and I thank them for that very much, is yet another tool about how consistent and how intensive the relation between Romania and Germany are. Of course, Germany is our main, by far, our main economic partner, and that could already be a strong argument, confirming what I've said. But the fact that we organize and we have this type of dialogue on issues which are not just only bilateral, strictly classical bilateral issues, but about our region, for our region and for the continent itself, speaks, in my opinion, quite convincingly about the substance of this German-Romanian relations. And I'm particularly glad to be here today, especially since, and always I meet all my friends. I hope that the Ambassador will accept this qualification from my side. I'm very pleased to continue a very friendly and open dialogue which we started some time ago when I was still in Berlin. Well, with these remarks, I would try to get into the subject and to say, and I'm not saying that just it is our German friends, because this is what I really feel, and it is not only my personal feel that it's that I can say a position of Romania. We have appreciated a lot and welcomed a lot the fact that Germany decided to take over the presidency of the OSCE. It's, I can allow myself to say, it's been a very wise decision, and a very timely one, looking into what has already been mentioned here, the security environment in Europe and the general atmosphere in Europe, and what this is our region. So this is something which I wanted to underline. And I feel upbeat starting from this crisis. And also I will say that with the successive presidency, I mean the Austrian presidency, I find that there will be a stronger dimension of continuity between the efforts aiming at dealing with not that simple issues which are crop here in Europe. So we look with optimism, of course realistic optimism, to work closely with the German presidency throughout the next year to bring our contribution to the extent possible to exchange views, but not only, to hopefully come to some concrete results in some areas which we do think that they are and they have to be the priority for the German presidency and for all of us, actually. We have to, it is our analysis, we have to be as pragmatic as possible and to focus on the real problems which are confronting our region, our continent. And that brings me to what Ambassador said, and I think that it's a good approach to look into and to deal with these things based upon this principle of bottom-up. I find it's an expression of the wish to be as pragmatic as possible. As for areas, or priority areas where the OSCE should continue, I would say, and should upgrade its activities, I think that it is essential that next year as well, more than perhaps has been the case so far, we should concentrate on those issues which are really affecting the security in Europe. And I'm referring first of all to what is in the language of the OSCE called the crisis in and around Ukraine, the settlement of the frozen conflicts or protracted conflicts. And I'm glad that Ambassador Ledezir was referring to one which is very much close to our border. I'm referring to the frozen conflict in Transnistria, but not only. This one is specific, let's say, it has a specific dimension as far as we are concerned. And last but not least, we have to do whatever we can in order to provide or assure the full implementation of the existing acquis of commitments on all these the three dimensions of the OSCE. As far as Romania is concerned, we are determined to work as closely as possible with the German presidency and to bring our contribution to the extent possible to bringing some concrete results in this area. Of course, we fully go along with the 5 priority lines of action which have been already mentioned here, while stressing once again that the security dimension is of extreme importance, as it was also mentioned by Ambassador Ledezir. I think that the other two dimensions have to be paid appropriate attention as well. Be it the economic dimension, and here comes the idea of better using the opportunity offered by the OSCE framework for a dialogue, a more intensive dialogue. I'm also referring to the human dimension, very important. And here I think I feel the need to reiterate what I already stressed in Belgrade last week in the OSCE ministerial. Here an important task is to keep and to preserve the autonomy of the institutions which are involved in this area as well. I would perhaps conclude by saying that what we heard today from the special envoy of the Organization for the OSCE presidency is generating, I would say, optimism. And if I associate it with the speech which was delivered by Minister van Steinmeier last week in Belgrade, I think we have a good basis for a real advancement in making steps towards solving definitely complicated issues which are falling within the responsibility of the OSCE, while, as I said from the very beginning, keeping in mind that we have to be pragmatic and realistic. So with this in mind, I wish full success to the German OSCE presidency. And I will end up here once again mentioning, stressing the importance which we give to making progress as far as the protracted conflicts in them, first of all referring to Transnistria. Because this is extremely important. And by the way, here I may say that I may qualify as a positive development, which is related to the economy and trade, but which, in my opinion, may have a positive influence on the general atmosphere. The fact that a compromise has been identified in negotiations between the EU and Chisinau and Tiraspol for the entry into force and implementation of the DCFTA also in Transnistria, that may, I hope, may bring some, let's say, incentives towards the increasing the awareness of what that means keeping and strengthening the territorial integrity of the Republic of Moldova. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador and Minister. Optimism is necessary, of course, but if we try to make a list of challenges, we have an economic crisis inside the European Union, we have the migrant crisis in our borders, inside the European Union. We have the situation in Ukraine after the Russian aggression and annexation of Crimea. We have the Middle East war and recently the bilateral situation between Turkey and Russia after the downing of the Russian plane. So a lot of challenges, very stormy water, if I can quote Mr. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and of course we need a lot of wisdom and a lot of chance, I can say, to find some solution. And this is the real challenge, because we are not talking just only about the future of Middle East region, the future of Ukraine. We are talking about the real future of European Union as we know European Union, because European Union and European values are under threat. And we can see the rise of nationalism, the rise of far-right parties, the rise of anti-European speech inside European countries. And let's see what it will be, the situation, the political situation. We have the example of France. So a lot of questions. I don't know how many answers we have, but I have the pleasure to open the session of questions and answers of our guests. Please, you can have the floor. Let me, please. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Șerban Filip Cioculescu. I work in the Faculty of Political Science of the University of Bucharest. First, I want to know your opinion about something which is very, very sensitive within this organization. This is the decision-making procedure, the rule of unanimity. You know that when Romania took part in was a founding country of this organization, a Romanian delegation insisted to have this unanimity rule, you know, because our political regime at this time wanted to have a non-restricted sovereignty on the decision. But now, many people and observers and analysts think that this unanimity rule is not really very good for the organization, because it creates some kind of paralysis in the decision-making process. It's very easy for a country to block the decision. Or if you look at the European Union, they diminish the number of the situation of unanimity. They tend to increase the qualified majority. So, I know it's a big organization, the OSCE, but in order to... Yes, so this is my question. And second, what about the conventional force treaty in Europe? It was one of the military key guarantees given under the OSCE that the level of conventional military weapons in Europe will stay at a low level. But you know, in 2007, Russia declared that it had frozen its participation, so no more conventional force for Russia. Also, NATO countries, after some years, gave up. And the situation is that after Crimea, Russia continues to increase the level of weapons. I think at Crimea, they brought even missiles, I think at Kaliningrad, even Transnistria. So what about the position of Germany concerning this conventional force treaty in Europe? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. Your question on the consensus issue or consensus -1 issue. You yourself said that there is a big diversity of positions and also voting practice out of the 57 participating states. In the EU, we can have a qualified majority, and we don't have it in security issues. We only have it in I don't want to diminish because it's a big achievement, but in security issues, there is still, both in NATO, of course, there is not consensus -1. I mean, you have the national key always to participate or not in missions. Of course, there is the binding Article 5 guarantee, security guarantee, but there is the security issues are still related to national sovereignty. And I think of course, sometimes we would wish that there was a possibility to have consensus -1 or consensus minus several states' decisions, but it wouldn't be implemented in the states concerned. So it can only make sense in very rare situations and would have to do with the situation of isolating this country who is not consenting to that decision. So I don't think it's a good principle for the OSCE, because the CSCE process strength has always been that there is inclusiveness, and there inclusiveness and not be bound on other no veto possibility and so on, but having the consensus rule has been leading to the fact that that participating states entered the CSCE process and then afterwards the stayed in the OSCE. I think it would lead to an erosion of the OSCE if this principle, there is no consensus for the giving up the consensus principle in the organization. And the arms control regimes are really at the very heart of the German chairmanship. As you probably have noticed, we need strategic patience and endurance in that respect, because in times of crisis there is obviously also a reluctance of participating states to come to agreements in arms control issues. You mentioned the CFE and also then the adapted CFE treaties that are, you touched upon the issue of conventional arms control in Europe. Indeed, now the time is probably, it's overdue that we have a reform and modernization of the concept of these treaties. Even the ACFE, so the adapted conventional forces agreement or treaty has not been, nowadays would not be modern enough, because technologies have advanced, military dispositions have advanced, and there are many groups of weapons, for example, not included in the CFE and ACFE arrangements. Of course, this is one of our goals, to pave the way in the long run to a discussion that would lead to such a comprehensive arms control regime again that would be respected and fully implemented. But there you need the preparedness of participating states to join into this effort, and you need a longer time to prepare also for the methodological issues. You know, what weapon systems to integrate, and shouldn't we go more for capacities instead of categories of weapons. But it is a long-term goal of the chairmanship, but will have to be continued by future chairmanships.
Just one brief comment on the question related to consensus. I fully subscribe to what Pastor Ledouze is saying. And if we want to make, let's say, advances in the cooperation within the OSCE, I think that we have to base ourselves on the principles which have already been and are there, and not to, let's say, seek changing rules, because as it was mentioned here, that would not join the benefit of a consensus, first of all, and that means the risk of opening debate, an endless debate, which would affect the activity of the organization. Well,
thank you. My name is Hossein Senjari. I'm the ambassador of Iraq. Thank you very much, and thank you for the organizers. These days we see that Turkey has sent troops in spite of the protest by the Iraqi federal government and like that. At the same time, Turkey is attacking the Kurdish people. Myself, I'm Kurdish from Iraqi Kurdistan. And those Kurdish people are the ones who are attacking Daesh, the ISIS. At the same time, we find Turkey has helped ISIS to enter into Syria and Iraq. In these days, Europe has decided to give around $3 billion to Turkey, which has always helped immigrants to go into Europe. Where does Europe find itself in these very difficult days for the region which I come from? And today and yesterday there was a so-called opposition, Syrian opposition, Democrats, liberals, but they are neither Democrats nor liberals, and many of them should be considered as terrorists. Thank you very much.
Excellency, I'm sure you have noticed that my minister was on a visit in Iraq at the beginning of this week. He has also commented on the situation you were referring to at the Turkish-Iraq border, and he has been saying that there is a clear interest of all states, of course, also of Germany, on de-escalation of this situation, and there was no further elaboration on a comment in that respect. So you apologize that I'm, as an OSCE task force head, I cannot comment further. What is sure is that we in Europe, we have in the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, which we try to produce the last 40 years, we have found a mechanism, at least to raise the issues amongst our participating states. Russia and Turkey, for example, had on foreign ministers level the opportunity to meet at the Belgrade Ministerial Council. Of course, this was not in the framework of an OSCE official or OSCE setup, but this proves that the OSCE is a platform for dialogue even in difficult times, because it's a mutual and consensus-orientated structure where you continue to go even if there are difficulties in the bilateral relations. it is at your disposal to use it as a platform. Of course, comparable to the United Nations in New York, but on a regional level. Also on Saudi Arabia. I mean, I don't know whether you followed the conference of the Mediterranean Partnership of the OSCE in Amman in October this year, because there is a Mediterranean Partnership already founded 40 years ago in Helsinki. It's part of the Helsinki Founding Act, because the securities are inextricably linked to the Mediterranean. That was the conclusion already 40 years ago. The Gulf states and your country and others in the whole Middle East is of course not member of this partnership, and there is no blueprint, the Organization of Security for Security and Cooperation in Europe can give to the region, to other regions. But of course the principles of keeping up dialogue channels would be something that is probably valuable all over the world.
Yeah, just one word on situations like the ones described here in the comments made in this room. They are just yet another, let's say, proof of what the emerging, let's say, forces like Daesh or ISIL, terrorist organizations can bring in terms of threats to peace stability in one region or another one. So the key element here is to make every effort to fight these terrorist organizations and actors. And I bet that it is extremely important also to find means and ways to identify the sources of financing those terrorist activities, and also the sources of supply of the equipment they use, and making such horrible acts as we witnessed in the region.
Further question, please. If not, I have a question about. Okay, there. In the back. Okay, please.
Thank you. I'm Carlos. I'm also professor at the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Bucharest. My question regards the role of the organization in mediating the dialogue between Belgrade and Bucharest regarding the situation of the Romanian minority in Serbia. As we all know, Romanian policy succeeded actually at a certain moment to block Serbian progress towards EU accession, and to have a kind of direct conditionality regarding the situation of Romanian minority in Serbia. OSCE became actually a kind of mediator in this dialogue. My question is, do you foresee any change in the position of the High Representative on National Minorities in this regard during the German presidency? And the same question for Mr. Komanescu, Mr. Minister. Thank you.
Minister Komanescu has also mentioned that the Romanian, and this is of course reflecting also the German national position, but certainly the work we will be doing next year, that the autonomous institutions like ODIHR, the representative for the freedom of media, and the High Commissioner for National Minorities, means tools to do an indispensable work and have to be supported and protect, and their mandate and autonomy has to be preserved and strengthened. So I'm quite sure that this will be a focal point or a focal issue in national minorities in the OSCE area will remain a pillar of the work of the OSCE.
Yeah. Two remarks. First of all, the existence of minorities in one country, the directly neighboring countries or not, minorities, the basic principle in our policy is that minorities do represent and should represent bridges between the countries where those minorities are. This is the basic principle of our approach. And just to more specific reference of yours, well, I would simply say that, you know, Serbia is a candidate country, a country which is practically on the entrance of direct complete negotiations for accession to the European Union. And you know definitely about the criteria in Copenhagen, and the country which is negotiating membership fulfills those criteria. And that's I think that the framework is there. And don't forget about the fact that when the European Union, and more precisely the European Commission, is making the accession reports on each of the candidates, they make their evaluations based upon many sources of information. And as Ambassador was mentioning here, be sure that evaluations by the OSCE Commissioner for Minorities, or by ODIHR, these are certainly taken into account when judging whether a country is fulfilling the criteria. And once the negotiation process is going on, that may give you the answer that things are on the right path. Please.
Alexander Lazarus, I'm the editorial chief of Weekly 22. So it's a good thing that, fortunately, Germany, which has played a major role in the negotiation of the Minsk agreement, will take the presidency of OSCE. But my question is, due to the very broad organization, and it was in many situations considered quite toothless, how can you do more? Because it's clearly you have a strong leverage in terms of what you can do in this area, especially regarding the Donbass situation in the region. But what can you do more than it's already done in terms of, I don't know, with observers on the ground or things like that, maybe? Because it's a very unstable situation, and we have seen the last days, the conflict is half-broken. It can disrupt any time from now on, especially in a very complicated situation we are now with Syria, Turkey, and so on. So, thank you.
First, I would say there is a intended synergy effect between having the responsibility for strengthening a special monitoring mission and the trilateral contact group, and at the same time in the Normandy format, which you refer to, having a role. And we will strive to use this and also to keep of course the participating states, especially partners like Romania, fully informed about what is going on. You have probably seen that the SMM has been starting this. First answer to your question: what else can be done in addition to what has already been done? For example, they are establishing now these forward patrol bases. These are very militarily technical points. Of course, there's a political point that you have to have the consent of the conflict parties there, and it's a civil mission, no weapons. They depend also on the consent of the conflict parties. So they have established yesterday or the day before in Horlivka, for example, another of these forward patrol bases. This is a process that is ongoing, that has to do also with capacities and how they are supported. They have now a second type of unmanned aerial vehicles, for example, medium range, that had to be procured, there had to be a budget for this, and they are more and more using, because they have these access problems to the whole mission area. They are, of course, more and more using also technical equipment to monitor the situation on the ground. And I think without the mutual reporting and the presence of the monitors there, we would have probably faced even worse problems. Of course, now we all have to work politically. This is not only a task for the chairmanship and the participants in the Normandy format, that the Minsk implementation package will be implemented, and there will be progress above all in security situation. The security situation has to be consolidated, and there is a crucial role for SMM and our support for SMM in this respect. So I think the OSCE will continue next year to play a decisive role in that conflict and in managing that conflict.
Yes, further questions, please, if you have. Yes, in the back, please. It's far away, but we can manage.
Vlad Berlin, journalist with Sursa Zilei. One question for Mrs. Lenderze. Ambassador and Minister Cornescu reminded that Romania's priority regarding the German chairmanship is the situation in Transnistria. Can you be more specific regarding this and the whole situation in Transnistria, the frozen conflict, and regarding what can be done referring to the Russian commitment, I think in 1999, to withdraw its troops, linked also to OSCE. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think the Transnistria and Moldova engagement of the OSCE is one we take particularly focus on. We have nominated a German special representative of the German chairmanship, which is an exclusion because we have an Austrian one and a Swiss one for the other protected, Ukraine is not protected conflict, but for the protected conflict situations. We will, one of the only four declarations that went through in the ministerial evaluate was the declaration on Transnistria. And it was said that the efforts should be redoubled to try to pave the way for a settlement of the conflict. I already said in my short introduction, as long as there is the 5+2 format has to be kept working, all the operative chances it delivers have to be used. So we can use confidence-building measures and offers, not only in trade issues, what was mentioned by the minister, but also in environmental and education areas, to offer projects and engagements interesting to at both sides of the Dniester for the population, and in order not to also to alleviate their situation, but also to build confidence and show pragmatically that there will be only a solution for the population itself if there is a common approach and an insight in common interests on the ground. And we try to pave the way for settlement, of course, but it's difficult to say what the timelines for that will be. But it's also important to stick to the task and not to get tired, but in the opposite, to redouble efforts.
Yeah, no, just to adjust the fact that indeed we do not see a better framework given the circumstances, of course, for efforts aimed at coming to a resolution of the conflict, other than the 5+2 format. And we very much welcome, without diminishing of the importance of the other special employees, but the fact that Germany so decided to designate a German, highly experienced diplomat as in charge with the transition conflict, something which we very much appreciate.
Thank you. One more question, please, because the Minister has to go, and we thank you for his time. Here, please, if you have one more question. If not, yeah.
My name is I'm from CaleaEuropeana.ro, and I would like to ask how could OSCE contribute to maintain the borders of Ukraine, and there is a risk of creating a precedent after the annexation of Crimea by Russia. Thank you.
Thank you for raising this issue, because this was also one important issue at the ministerial in Belgrade, to clearly name and denominate that there was an infliction and violation of Helsinki principles and commitments by this illegal annexation of Crimea.
Fully subscribe to that. Thanks. Until for helping me not to dwell too much on that.
Thank you very much for this discussion. It's a very challenging year for Germany and also for Europe. My remark is I had the opportunity to meet Egon Bahr in Berlin last year, and I asked him which is the most important problem for Europe in these days, and his answer was to keep peace in Europe. This is the most important thing. Without peace we can't build anything. So I hope you will succeed in your mission, next year mission. It's a very challenging and turbulent time. You are president, you become president of OSCE, and we hope Germany will find the supporters and friends to have a very successful presidency. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Excuse me. I would also like to thank you very much that you took the time, and for all of our guests, our distinguished guests,